Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to the May 20th, 2021 special meeting, joint meeting of the City of Walnut Creek Planning Commission and Transportation Commission. This is a meeting by teleconference only. Mr. Secretary, will you?
Thank you, Chair. And this is a joint meeting. I'll begin with the Transportation Commission. Commissioner German. He's here. Commissioner Salcido.
Here.
Commissioner Ash.
He's here too.
Vice Chair Cagill.
Present.
And Chair Milks.
Present.
All right. And now for the Planning Commission. Commissioner Lezak.
Here.
Commissioner Pickett.
Here.
Commissioner Anderson.
Here.
Commissioner Ward.
Here.
Vice Chair Reiser.
Here.
And Chair Kerselek.
Here.
Chair, we have 11 members present. We have Commissioner Strongman from the Planning Commission absent. Otherwise, all members are present and accounted for.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. As stated earlier, this is a meeting by teleconference only. This meeting is being held in accordance with the Brown Act as currently in effect under the State Emergency Services Act, the Governor's Emergency Declaration related to COVID-19, and the Governor's Executive Order N-2920 issued on March 17, 2020, that allows attendance by members of the Commission, city staff, and the public to participate and conduct the meeting by teleconference. Teleconference locations are not open to the public. To provide a live remote public comment, you can join the Zoom teleconference meeting. The meeting ID for this meeting is 936-0577-0644, and the password is 618718. When the chair opens the public comment period during this evening's special meeting, please use the raised hand feature or press *9 to alert staff and the commissioners that you have a public comment you would like to provide. Please wait your turn, and once you are brought into the meeting, state your name and your city of residence for the record, and you will have 3 minutes to make your remarks. As this is a special meeting, the public comments will be taken during the discussion, and they will be limited to the item tonight only. And with that, we will move to the item of business tonight, which is the Cities of Walnut Creek Sustainability Action Plan. And Cara, before we move into your presentation, would you like to give us a brief overview of how we're going to run the meeting tonight and the process we're going to follow?
Yes, Director Wardlaw is going to give an introduction, but just on the process, there will be a brief presentation. After the presentation, there will be an opportunity for questions and comments from commissioners, and then an opportunity for public comment. So if any member of the public wishes to speak, that would be the time. Then we'll be continuing a little bit further and having a discussion about strategies and getting input from the commission. So I will hand it over to Director Wardlaw.
Thank you, Kara. That's kind of my presentation. Thank you very much. Good evening, chairs and commissioners. Tonight, you're going to hear from your project team for the Sustainability Action Plan. This plan is being developed in 3 separate phases. Phase 1 focused on developing a vision and completing some technical work for that plan. And that section is now completed. We're in the middle of phase 2 of the plan, which is focused on policy and strategy development. Have you all started the PowerPoint show? That'd be no. Great. Okay. So let's go to the next slide. Perfect. Let's go to the next slide. This evening, we're going to report out some of the aspects of the community engagement that we received during phase 1. And we'll also present the council's approved approach to phase 2 and the framework for analyzing greenhouse gas reductions. We'll present 3 scenarios that will be analyzed for greenhouse gas reductions and the factors and criteria that will be used to evaluate those strategies. Then we'll ask the commissioners for their input on some of the preliminary draft strategies in the three main topic areas, as well as ideas on what would be needed to successfully implement these strategies. Next slide. Tonight, you'll hear from your team, your city staff team, myself, the sustainability coordinator and housing analyst, Kara Batista Rao, who just spoke, and then our consultant team, who's with PlaceWorks and Cadmus. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Kara.
Thank you. So I'll just give a quick overview of the Sustainability Action Plan. Next slide, please. As you know, the City Council adopted our first climate action plan in 2012 that set 2 different climate reduction goals. So reducing greenhouse gas emissions across the community, as well as reducing them from our city operations and facilities by the year 2020. So we're working to build on those successes by updating this plan, and we are on track to meet or exceed these goals. Next slide, please. So the existing climate action plan had 21 different strategies and 157 implementation actions. It covered a wide range of issues, and we were able to implement about 80% of all of the actions. So you can see here just a couple examples of different strategies and some of the accomplishments in terms of electricity saved, miles of bike facilities improved, and more that came out of that plan. Next slide, please. So these existing actions from our current climate action plan help to form a foundation as we look forward and look at making updates to it. We also are able to account for different state actions in terms of state clean car standards or the building code, and regional and local actions that are helping to reduce our emissions in Walnut Creek further. Next slide, please. So the Sustainability Action Plan, this is a council priority, and they've asked us to update and also expand the Climate Action Plan. So we are looking at new strategies to further reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And then we're adding 2 newer topics. So climate adaptation, which is the idea that we need to kind of prepare for and be resilient to climate-related disasters and hazards. And that will help us to also be in compliance with some new state laws. And then sustainability topics. And so these are topics that are a little less related to climate change, things like water, air quality, and waste. And addressing these kinds of sustainability issues can also help to improve other issues like public health or job creation. Next slide. So just briefly on some of the work completed in phase 1. Next slide. We did a lot of community outreach in phase 1, focused around coming up with a vision for the future, as well as a lot of technical work, which your commissions heard last summer. And all of that information is available on the project website for anyone who's interested. Next slide. We did want to report out some very high-level takeaways from our community engagement work. And attachment 1 in your agenda packet had a summary of that, and all individual comments are up on the project website. But just very broadly, in talking with the public, the stakeholders, commissions, and council, there was widespread acknowledgement that Walnut Creek is already seeing impacts from climate change, and a lot of interest in this being a priority issue for the city. People had concerns about wildfires, droughts, and how to evacuate during emergencies. And we also received a lot of different ideas from the community around greenhouse gas reduction strategies. So people were very interested in collaborating in looking at transportation, electrification, and addressing waste. So more information in your agenda packet, but that was the high-level summary. Next slide. So phase 1 is complete. We are in phase 2, as Mark mentioned, and working on developing strategies. When we are doing that, we're really working in the context of the state's regulations and guidance around climate. And the state has adopted legislation that has binding greenhouse gas reduction goals. to reduce emissions 40% below 1990 levels by the year 2030. And it also has two non-binding executive orders that you can see here. So the older executive order from 2005 has an 80% reduction goal by the year 2050. And then a more recent one has a net carbon neutral goal by the year 2045. So net carbon neutral, it means really reducing emissions as much as possible, and then anything that's remaining would be offset. So that's a very ambitious goal. Next slide. So in March, the project team went to City Council and talked about analyzing 3 different scenarios, and Council approved us looking at these 3 scenarios in terms of what greenhouse gas reduction goals to analyze, and then look at what strategies would be needed to reach them. So in the low scenario, we're really looking at just continuing the city's current actions under our climate action plan that we have now. The medium scenario is what we're calling the state compliance scenario. It would involve meeting that 40% reduction in the year 2030 and an 80% reduction in the year 2050. And it would require new strategies. And then the high net carbon neutral scenario would look at a 40% reduction in the year 2030 and becoming net carbon neutral in 2045. And again, that would be a big lift and require new and bigger strategies. Next slide, please. So this is really just kind of graphically showing some of what I just said. The white line that you see are the state goals that I just mentioned. The dotted green line is Walnut Creek's baseline emissions. That yellow line is showing what our emissions reductions look like with just our existing actions in our climate action plan that we have now. And the black line is showing what would happen, that emissions would increase if we stop taking action. So you can see in the year 2020, the yellow dot compared to the white dot, Walnut Creek is ahead of the state. We have much deeper reductions that we've achieved. In the year 2030, the state's goals are just a little bit ahead of where we're forecasted to be. And then by the year 2050, that gap widens by about 37%. So the state is at 80% reduction, and we are projected to be at 46% if we take no new actions or new strategies. Next slide, please. So in this process, we're going to be talking tonight a lot about strategies to reach those different scenarios and goals. And we've been kind of presenting strategies to the community. We're here tonight with the commissions, and we have an online survey coming up soon to wrap up community engagement. And then we'll get into this a little bit more in the presentation, but we'll be analyzing these strategies using some evaluation criteria that Council approved, and then returning to City Council likely in July to present them with the list of different strategies, how they rank across all these criteria, and how they contribute to reaching these three scenarios. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Eli, and he's going to talk a bit more about the strategy development process and the criteria.
Thank you, Kara. Right now, we are in the process of developing and prioritizing strategies to include in the Sustainability Action Plan. We want to look at strategies that touch on all 3 of these areas that Kara and Mark discussed: reducing greenhouse gas emissions, adapting to climate change, and improving sustainability, and addressing any broader sustainability issues in Walnut Creek. So these statements are really, these strategies are really statements of what the city is going to do under the plan. Beyond just the basics of wanting these strategies to address these critical issues, we do want to make sure that the strategies are meeting community needs and values. They should be specifically tailored to Walnut Creek. Critically, they need to be measurable and trackable so the city can understand and report on its progress to community members. The strategies should fit into the work plans of city departments or key partners to make sure that someone is clearly responsible for implementing the strategies, That will also help us to leverage public and private partnerships and other programs. We want the strategies to be based on feedback from members of the public. They should also be based on input from city staff and decision makers, best practices, existing successful efforts in Walnut Creek and the region, building on some of that existing work that Kara mentioned, as well as new and emerging opportunities, really kind of pushing the cutting edge and taking advantage of new opportunities that are out there. The City Council has approved several criteria that we'll use to help evaluate potential strategies. Those are shown here. And these include level of greenhouse gas reduction that the strategy would achieve, the costs and the cost savings associated with the strategy, and other factors associated with implementation. And these are the criteria that we'll be looking at to determine which potential strategies are written up and included in the adopted plan. In addition to the criteria, the City Council has also approved a set of, if you will, factors. And these are additional influences or considerations to keep in mind when developing strategies. So these are some of the key topics that the City Council would like us to support and to try and address with these strategies. These won't be formally scored or evaluated. We're not going to necessarily assign a number to how potential strategies fit with these factors, but we do want them to help inform the strategy development process. I mentioned that one of the criteria we will be looking at are what are called co-benefits. So I want to take just a little time to explain those. The primary intent of the strategies in the Sustainability Action Plan, as we said, is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, support resilience, and improve sustainability. Ideally, a strategy can do all three of those. But in addition to those, there are other community values or priorities that these strategies can support. And these are what we're calling the co-benefits. And these include things like improving public health, helping community members to save money on utility bills, enhancing equity, and a number of other items. So looking at the greenhouse gas reduction strategies, there are really two ways to decrease emissions. First, a strategy can decrease the amount of an activity that produces emissions. And second, a strategy can decrease the level of emissions, the so-called carbon intensity that is produced per amount of activity. So for example, if the idea is to reduce emissions from transportation, one way to do that is to decrease the amount of miles that people are driving, make public transit more accessible, encourage people to take bikes or to walk. That's that first option. That's reducing the activity. And then the second option, the decreasing the carbon intensity, that would be focused around increasing electric vehicle adoption or supporting more fuel efficient vehicles. People might still be driving the same amount, but they're doing so in a way that produces less carbon emissions for every mile that they drive. Now, we recognize that the city might only be able to affect one of these two areas for some topics. In some cases, it will be able to address both. So we really want to look at all the options that are available to us. I want to take just a little time to go over some of the categories of greenhouse gas reduction strategies, beginning with transportation and land use. This is the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in Walnut Creek. Emissions have come down since 2005, at least as of 2017. And in 2017, people were still driving about as much as they were back in 2005. And there was an increase in BART miles. But the decrease in greenhouse gas emissions is really all about more fuel efficient vehicles. People are still driving the same, but they're using less gas as they do so, and that has caused this decrease that you see here. There has also been an increase in the amount of electric vehicles, EVs, in the city. As of 2018, there were close to 1,700 electric vehicles in Walnut Creek. I know that number has gone up in the past few years. And there are also almost 50 publicly accessible chargers, and that doesn't include proprietary chargers like the Tesla chargers or those in private garages or private offices. Another area that we expect to get a lot of attention in the Sustainability Action Plan is natural gas use in buildings. So in homes, natural gas use in 2017 was about 9% below 2005 levels. In non-residential buildings, on the other hand, natural gas use increased 18%. So overall, you see that emissions have kind of gone up and down a little over the past 15 years. Natural gas by itself is responsible for about 20%, a little more, of Walnut Creek's greenhouse gas emissions. And unlike with electricity, there isn't a currently available option for a cleaner source of natural gas. There isn't the natural gas equivalent of solar panels you could put on your roof or better service from MCE that you could sign up for. So in addition to the greenhouse gas emissions created by natural gas, this is also a public health and a climate resilience issue. Burning natural gas releases carbon monoxide, formaldehyde, and a number of other harmful pollutants into the air. So without proper ventilation, indoor air pollution from natural gas appliances, and particularly from cooking appliances, can cause and worsen a wide range of health problems, nose and throat irritation, headaches, fatigues, nausea, and the like. Young children, the elderly, and persons with asthma are particularly at risk, and that can be exacerbated by climate-related hazards such as extreme heat. So addressing these natural gas emissions not only reduces a greenhouse gas side of things, but can also help improve resiliency to extreme heat and other hazards, getting at that adaptation side of the spectrum. On the opposite side, emissions from electricity have decreased 68% in 2017 compared to 2005. However, total electricity use is only down about 5%. So that reduction is really due to sources of electricity in Walnut Creek becoming a lot cleaner. And that's especially due to the switch to MCE in 2017. We expect electricity to continue to get cleaner as time goes on, in accordance with MCE's own plans and in accordance with state law. And MCE is planning by next year to get at least 95% of their electricity from renewable or other carbon-free sources. And then there is the community health and resilience side. This is another critical component. As part of the technical work for this plan, we prepared a climate vulnerability assessment that identified how climate change will affect Walnut Creek. This is required under state law to be included in the general plan safety element. So when that document gets updated, it can refer back to the sustainability action plan for this vulnerability assessment, and we'll make sure that the two are consistent. One of the areas that we identified as being potentially harmful is extreme heat. These are days where the high temperature exceeds 98 degrees in Walnut Creek. These are expected to rise by a historic average of about 4 per year, up to as many as 20 days in 2050, as many as 34 days, more than 1 month's worth, by 2100. There are also declines in local rainfall and stream flow that we're looking at, and a decline in precipitations in the Sierra Nevada watersheds where Walnut Creek's water comes from. We are already beginning to experience that recently. So those drought events are likely to become more frequent and more intense. There are also potential hazards from wildfire, landslides, air quality impacts, and a number of other climate-related hazards. So we want to make sure that those are addressed and that there are strategies in the Sustainability Action Plan to look at those issues, particularly when it comes to helping the most vulnerable persons and some of the most vulnerable community assets. So thank you for that. I know that was a lot of information all at once. As Kara mentioned, we'll pause here to take any questions and public comment before we get into the strategy discussion.
Thank you, Kara and Eli. Very nice presentation. As you mentioned, Eli, we will take questions on the presentation so far from the commissioners. Then we will open it up to comments from the public, and then we will move on to providing input on the strategies. So at this time, do any of the commissioners have any questions on the presentation so far? Commissioner Anderson?
Thank you. On the staff report and on page 2, when the state mandates are presented, can the staff perhaps give a comparison or indicate how they're related, the net carbon neutral emissions versus the reduction in emissions from a baseline?
Yeah, I will just say, the state has set two different goals for itself.
Right.
Earlier, they had set an 80% reduction goal. And then more recently, I think, they wanted to be more ambitious, and we're looking at some of these impacts from climate change. And so set that 2045 net carbon neutral goal. So, the idea behind net carbon neutral is that you would reduce emissions as much as possible. So past 80%, see how far you can get, and then offset any emissions that are remaining. I don't know if Tammy or Eli, you would like to add anything to that.
Okay. The second question I had was the graph that you showed with Walnut Creek's planned reduction currently ahead of the state goals, but the state goals rapidly outstripping it by 2050. And I'm wondering, is there something? Are those state goals just simply goals? There's no, are there things the state is anticipating doing that Walnut Creek is not planning to do?
We would look at any actions that the state is planning to take that we can solidly count on, things that are kind of in law or regulations, and take that into account when looking at how much they're helping to reduce our emissions, and then how much further we would need to go from there. So for example, the state building code is something that we'd be looking at. And if it goes far, but there's room for us to go farther, that's where we might consider a strategy for Walnut Creek.
Okay. And the last question I had was related to the factors that are going to be considered. One of them was new technological advances. And I'm wondering, are those revolutionary but currently unknown technical advances, or are there particular technological advances that are anticipated?
Yeah, it's hard. We can't really anticipate too much of the future, but we are seeing a lot of new technology right now, especially in the transportation sector with autonomous vehicles, batteries, electrification. So for those technologies that maybe are at the early edge of adoption, that's something we'd want to think about, how we expect that to grow going forward. But we're not looking for a technology that we don't know about, that doesn't exist yet.
Thank you.
Are there any other commission questions? Commissioner Reiser.
Yes, just a quick question. It seems like, and I think this was mentioned at the last phase 1 meeting as well, but it seems like we're looking in the rearview mirror in terms of a baseline, or looking at data a few years back. It goes something like 2010, 15, 17. What is going to be our standard, or how often is this data updated as to what we're tracking against?
Yeah, so we tried to do like a full greenhouse gas inventory, which is like the full-blown analysis of the data about every 5 years. So that was that 2017 data that you saw. And the data lags, so it's very hard to get the data quickly and turn it around. It might be possible in 6 months to look at 2020. So what we did for 2020 was forecast based on what our emissions were in 2017, the actions we know we've taken between 2017 and 2020 to see where we expected to be at in 2020. So 2017 with the actual inventory, we were about 27% reduction below our baseline. And 2020, we're expecting to be at 33%, not counting any impacts from the pandemic. So.
Thank you.
Commissioner Salcido.
Apologies, there's a sound happening. If you want to go to someone else first, I have some sort of technical issue happening at the moment.
Okay, great. Any other questions? Commissioner Lezak.
Thank you, staff, for a very good presentation. And I will let you know, I'm looking at this attachment 3, which is the preliminary new strategies. And some of my thoughts were about sort of existing state policies and things that I know as a result of those policies, other cities are doing. So my questions are sort of about, whether Walnut Creek is doing any of those similar things. And the first is, related to reducing transportation-related greenhouse gas emissions. I know several years ago, the Office of Planning Research, made this a top goal. Their reductions standards are very similar to what, you're showing. And as part of that, there was a transition over the last few years through the CEQA process from level of service to vehicle mile traveled. And as part of vehicle mile traveled analysis, there's a real emphasis not only on being close to transportation, but also in those areas that can't be that close to transportation, that incorporate transportation management implementation procedures and a whole policy of TDM policies. And so I'm wondering to what degree, as part of the city's analysis of VMT, that folks have looked at TDM, and have we done anything that would calculate what the reduction of certain TDM measures might be towards GHG reduction? And I use as an example, there's several cities who've not only done heat maps on VMT within their cities, but have even done analysis to show how much reduction each one of these TDM things might do for GHG to help VMT, so they can evaluate whether projects are going to be under that threshold. So it's kind of a new and upcoming part of planning within the state, within various cities, but it's all coming out of the same sustainability action, initiatives. And I bring this up in the context of a comment that City Council member Cindy Silva made during our meeting earlier this week, where she mentioned that the state's Housing Community Development Department is about to release the regional housing needs assessment numbers, and that in the next housing cycle, the city is likely going to be asked to produce about 6,000 new housing units. And so if, not only are we trying to reduce our emissions, we're trying to do it in an environment where we're growing. So the VMT analysis and how TDM fits into that, I think, is a really important part of this particular goal. And I'm wondering, how much work the city has done on this already.
I will just say, I know that our Rethinking Mobility Plan, which has already been adopted, does talk a lot about different TDM strategies. So that's something where we'll be going through the strategies and quantifying their impacts for the Sustainability Action Plan. I would have to talk a little bit more with our traffic engineering staff about what work they've done to date, but we can certainly take that as a suggestion to look into for our strategies. And Tammy, I don't know if you want to jump in and talk a little bit more about how we're thinking about CEQA and VMT under this plan.
Well, I was going to suggest that Eli could maybe talk about that. We will be quantifying TDM benefits when we work on the strategies. So we haven't done that yet, unless Eli wants to correct me on that. But VMT is a big part of the work that we do. We were a little ahead of CEQA in climate action planning and taking a close look at VMT. So Eli might want to add a little bit more there.
No, I think that sums it up. We are certainly aware of TDM as a strategy to reduce VMT and associated greenhouse gas emissions. And we will be evaluating that when we get into the strategy evaluation phase. We just aren't at that point quite yet.
Okay, so on the next one, which is buildings and energy related to greenhouse gas emissions, I'm a huge fan of electric cars and solar technology, and the requirement that all new housing is going to have solar panels, and that will encourage folks to have electric vehicles. And I certainly think that electrical vehicle chargers in public spaces is a priority that we should look at. My question is more about greenhouse gas and natural gas. I've noticed that now over 40 cities in the state of California have adopted what they're calling REACH code ordinances. And in those codes, they're not just waiting for the energy code to update and require residential homes to be all electric. There's a movement towards not allowing new buildings to have natural gas. And in some cities, there's even ordinances that don't allow any new natural gas pipes to be installed in city streets whatsoever. And interestingly enough, PG&E doesn't seem to have a problem with that. They seem to acknowledge that that's not the business that they want to be in. So has the city contemplated a REACH ordinance? Is that something that we're currently working on, in conjunction with something like the sustainability plan?
So that's a great question. When we get into the strategy discussions next, after your questions and public comment, that is one of the strategies that we would like your input on. So there's, ideas around all electric requirements, and that could be, a range of things, new construction, existing construction, and other ideas. So as we get into that discussion portion tonight, we can talk about that more.
Okay, sorry, I didn't mean to get ahead of the discussion. I just thought maybe these were policies that we were already working on, like other cities. And then I'll just pick a last one, and that is, I've noticed in the community health and resilience, there's a lot of discussion about, at least during the community outreach, about evacuation and fires. And I know, that was in part due to fires in other places and cities. In our community, there's certainly volunteer CERT groups and groups doing quite a bit from a volunteer point of view. What's the city doing in an organized fashion for those kinds of things? Are there coordination with CERT groups? Are there, emergency evacuation drills or things of that nature that city staff is thinking about and planning?
Yeah, so I know pre-COVID, our emergency officer in the city manager's office and our kind of safety staff have been working to do a couple of evacuation drills. I'm forgetting the name of the neighborhood, I think. But there was one in a residential section where they worked with a number of different, like the police, fire, to practice an evacuation. And then I know that there have been a lot of meetings and talks with Rossmore and, how to coordinate and work with our regional partners who would be involved in a response to have a safe evacuation there. So those kinds of efforts are already underway. And if there are, ideas for how to do them better or how to address things we're not doing well yet, we would love to hear them tonight.
Okay, thank you for all of that. Back to you, Chair Crisselli.
Commissioner Salcido, are you ready to go?
I am. Thank you, Chair. I think the audio issues have resolved. So one clarification I wanted to better understand is how we are quantifying the City of Walnut Creek's greenhouse gas emissions, because it's so difficult to put boundaries around something like this. And I'm just trying to better understand that in order to go into the strategy portion with a better understanding of, how we can approach this.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm going to invite Eli to chime in. We do follow a common methodology that is recommended for cities. So we have an apples to apples comparison with the data, but Eli is kind of our technical expert here.
Thank you, Kara. Yes, as Kara mentioned, there is a standard protocol that is approved by the state, and it's also the standard method that's been used by individual communities in Contra Costa County and the East Bay, so it allows for an easy comparison there. In general, it's looking at the activities that take place from residents, businesses, visitors, and other members of the Walnut Creek community. So when people use any electricity or natural gas use that occurs within the city limits, any trash that is thrown out and collected in the city, water use, and so on. We are also looking at transportation that occurs not only within the city itself, but also any transit activity that either begins or ends in the city. So we're looking at trips people might make to Oakland, San Francisco, San Jose, Sacramento, what have you. So there are specific methods that we follow for individual sources of greenhouse gas emissions, but that's kind of the general approach.
And so if we were to make, significant improvements within the city of Walnut Creek in terms of transportation, for example, and that dramatically reduced traffic on Ignacio Valley Road, and then an unintended consequence might be more people find it easier to live further out in East County and commute longer distances because there's less traffic on Ignacio Valley Road. How would that factor into our city's greenhouse gas emissions if that traffic is flowing through the city as a result? And we've done something to try to mitigate it, but then we're having commuters coming through our city.
It would kind of depend on the specifics of that scenario, but in general, traffic that is reduced within Walnut Creek will translate to lower greenhouse gas emissions than traffic that occurs between Walnut Creek and another community. So it definitely makes sense to reduce the VMT that is occurring within Walnut Creek, regardless of what is happening with other communities. And certainly this also ties into wanting to improve fuel efficiency and support for electric vehicles. So even if there is comparable levels of traffic, that the overall greenhouse gas emissions continue to go down. I would also just add that traffic that occurs or travel that occurs through Walnut Creek, say from Lafayette to Concord, passes through the city but doesn't stop in the city, that is not counted in your greenhouse gas emissions. Okay. So we're not looking at those kinds of pass-through trips.
Got it. Okay, that's helpful. And then one final question is, we have a housing crisis in the state of California, and all cities are asked to be adding to the housing inventory. So as assuming we are increasing inventory and there are more people living in the city, how does that affect our greenhouse gas emissions? Are we still, even if we add people and housing, does that sort of not matter in terms of how we are still being asked to scale back our greenhouse gas emissions?
Yeah, I would say in the past, when there has been more development, more energy use because there's more buildings, more driving because there's more people, it has generally resulted in more emissions. However, there have been some changes over the last few years in terms of different regulatory changes, such as the opportunity to do the REACH codes that were mentioned earlier around all electric buildings, new technology like electric vehicles, and some other factors where there is an opportunity to look at strategies to really reduce emissions from new development that weren't there, several years ago. So we have some of those up for discussion tonight that we'd like to get your input on. And that is also one of those factors that City Council asked us to keep in mind, is looking at, housing and the relationship to our sustainability work.
Thank you.
Eli, is it safe to assume that when you talk about the city of Walnut Creek, that includes the unincorporated areas within the city?
Generally speaking, we are trying to look at the city itself and not at those islands. So to the best of our abilities, the data that we're using is focused on areas within the city limits. I can't necessarily verify that that is 100% the case, but that is certainly what we've tried to do and what we've done as much as we can to ensure that.
Great, thank you. Commissioner German, you have some questions.
I do. As far as the sustainability report is concerned, the last year, do you plan on ignoring what's happening with people staying home and not taking trips in vehicles? And currently, there are a lot more EVs available than there were even a year ago. So as people go back to work, this year the sale will be a lot higher of these type of vehicles.
Yeah, we tried not to, when we were kind of forecasting emissions for 2020, we didn't look at impacts from the pandemic because a lot of them are going to be more temporary in nature. As you mentioned, people are staying home. Now they're going to start driving again. Some of those trips might be in electric vehicles, but we were forecasting just kind of based on the same methodology that we used for 2017. So I don't know if that gets to the heart of your question.
It does, in the sense that I'm retired, but say my wife used to work 5 days a week in her office. She will work 2 days moving forward at the office and 3 days at home. So that's 6 trips a week that she's not making.
Right.
So
So
you want to reset the report moving forward?
That would be a type of strategy that we can definitely consider. So tonight, as we get into the strategy discussion, there is something about kind of supporting and encouraging telework moving forward that we would love to hear your input on. So that is a way to reduce emissions by having people drive less, and look forward to discussing that more.
Okay.
Any other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Mills.
Hi, thank you. I have a question about how encompassing these estimates are, given that, for example, our trash and recycling is, likely heads up to Martinez. So is Martinez penalized for having a facility that handles everybody else's trash, or does that count as, all the garbage trucks there and trash and everything? Does that count kind of in the Walnut Creek atmosphere as what we are actually producing, and it just happens to go over to Martinez? And that's just one example of encompassing. Are we really looking at a holistic picture here? Thank you.
I'm going to pass it over to Eli again for this question.
Thank you, Kara. In general, yes, we are. So we're looking at the production. So even though the trash is produced in Walnut Creek, so that's where we're counting the emissions, even though it might be disposed of and the emissions might be physically released in Martinez or another community. It's similar to electricity, for example, even though you don't really have any big power plants in Walnut Creek, because the electricity is being used in the city, we are assigning those emissions to the city.
Thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners? Okay, seeing none, we will now open it up to comments from the public. This is the time. Ethan, do we have anybody from the public wishing to comment at this time?
Double check with my colleague, Chair Kerselik, one moment. Does not appear that we have any attendees waiting to make comment, and so I don't believe there's any member of the public wishing to comment on this item this evening.
Great. We will bring it back to you, Kara, to take us into the next portion of the meeting, which is the discussion of the strategy.
Thank you. I'm going to hand it off to Tammy, who will be facilitating the discussion.
Thank you, Kara. All right, good evening, everyone. Those were great questions, and I think we're warmed up and ready to talk about some new ideas for the Sustainability Action Plan. So in your staff report, attachment 3, which a couple of you have referenced, you have a 3-page attachment with titled Preliminary New Strategies. So we've taken those and we've put them on some slides. So you can go to the next slide, Eli. And so we have a few questions for your consideration as we talk about the strategies this evening. And these are questions, we've asked these similar questions of folks who participated in our community workshop and in our stakeholder engagement. So just keep these in mind as we go forward, and we can go back to this question slide as we need to. So, first, what suggestions do you have for the Sustainability Action Plan that you're not seeing on this list? It's important for us to know if you think there are opportunities out there for us to include. Second question to consider is, what concerns do you have about these preliminary strategies? Are there strategies that you see here that you wonder you have any considerations or concerns about them. Maybe you don't disagree with them in whole, but you would like a little bit more clarification to support them forward. And then and then thinking a little bit more closely about the strategies, what ideas do you have for how to support the strategy? The strategies listed, are there any barriers to implementation that come to mind when you read them? Or are there any implementation considerations that come to mind? So we know this is, there's a lot in these 3 questions. One of them is kind of like 3 questions in itself. And so we wanted to keep these in mind as we go through them. We know there are a lot of strategies. So we're not necessarily expecting each of you to comment on each idea. What we'd like to do is we'll advance to the next slide and just open it up for some discussion around each of these questions. Okay, so just to kind of get us refreshed here, again, this are the transportation and land use goal and strategies that are on the first page of attachment 3. There are 7 strategy ideas here. One thing I think we went over this a little earlier, but to note that these become developed out as they make it into the sustainability action plan. So the goal of this set of strategies is to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the transportation sector. And so each of these strategies, as we develop them, will have a set of actions so that to allow them to be implemented and accomplished in the timeframe of the plan. So I can read each of these if you'd like while we get oriented. And then I'll ask the questions. So these strategies range from coordinating with public transit agencies to expand service areas and frequencies, especially to traditionally underserved areas. We have a strategy related to traffic signalization, a strategy related to active transportation and the Rethinking Mobility Plan, a strategy related to electrical vehicle adoption in the community, a strategy related to ride sharing and TDM, as has brought up earlier, strategy related to telecommuting has come up, and a strategy related to urban infill and development on vacant underused parcels. So I'd like to open it up here to for all of you to provide some input framed with the questions that we've put forward. Are we missing anything? Is there anything here that causes concern? Do you have input on how to improve them?
Hey, Tammy, any of the commissioners wish to weigh in on the transportation and land use? Commissioner Pickett.
Yeah, I just had a question on just because I don't know, on the adoption rates, prioritize electric vehicle adoption rates within the city. It talks about existing rebates. Explain what that is. What is the existing rebates? What are we doing now?
Sure. Kara, Eli, I think we're referring to these are not city-sponsored rebate programs right now, right? These are by regional partners.
Correct. These would be, MCE, for example, has some rebate programs. The state has some rebate programs. So not necessarily the city currently offering them, although we could consider it in the future. So promoting these existing.
If I were to go out and buy an electric vehicle, I would be eligible for a rebate. Is that what this is about?
At least one of them. Yeah, there are currently rebates available to residents of Walnut Creek.
And how is that information, since I didn't know about it, how's that information communicated to the residents of Walnut Creek to know that that's available to them?
We work to share that information through our website, through different events that we table at, through e-newsletters. And for example, if you haven't heard of it and you think perhaps we should add a strategy for more outreach, that would be something we'd like to hear tonight. But there are ways that we promote it currently. And some of the different partners like NCE also do that kind of promotion.
Yeah, well, I would just say if we're gonna offer incentives for people to do things that we feel are beneficial to the climate situation, then we ought to advertise those. If we were a business and we were offering something 10% discount, we would advertise it. I try to read as much as I can of Walnut Creek stuff. It doesn't mean that it wasn't in the nutshell or something, but people are not going to go, if someone wants to go down and buy a Tesla or a Prius, they're not going to automatically want to go onto the city website to see if the city's offering a rebate or PG&Es or whatever. We have to take a progressive approach to letting people know that these things are available. So that just needs to be kept in the back of our heads, I guess, as we move forward with implementation of these things. I think is probably our next phase. That's all I have on this section.
Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you. I had a few comments on some of these. On the first strategy, it's a good idea to expand transportation services. I think it's important not to overdo that. I've seen a number of situations where, in attempts to increase transit usage, the bus service or whatever has been expanded to areas where, either because of the density or the street layout or the just tendency of people in the area to not use transit, just doesn't justify using it in those places. And there I'm talking about, kind of your standard bus service. That I think one needs to be careful about that. And in those areas, to look for, other ways of, smaller vehicles on a more, kind of demand basis to get to those folks if they do need to use transit. On the third strategy, dealing with kind of micro mobility, bike scooters and walking, I know some cities have had a fair amount of success in their downtown in closing off some streets, either a block or 2 or 3 blocks of a street to traffic. I've seen it well, some years ago, actually, in Boston, right downtown. There was an area that they closed off about 4 blocks of a major downtown street, and amid a lot of complaints that it would never work, and it worked wonderfully. That when people have an area that they can go to, and in fact walk around without traffic, having to cross streets and cluster on sidewalks and so forth, but actually just move around in an area. And it's the sort of thing that you see with the farmers markets, but on a more permanent basis, so that people get in the habit of going to that place and walking around there. So they make one trip with a car or transit, and don't have to be moving with transit or cars around the city. On the fourth one, electric vehicle adoption rates, I think what we've seen so far, and I think it's only accelerating, is a faster movement to electric vehicles than anybody anticipated, say, 5 years ago. I think with General Motors kind of committing to going all electric in a relatively short term for an auto company, you're going to see that accelerating somewhat. The one thing I see that can really bog it down is not having the recharging infrastructure available. So I think it's important, as part of that strategy, to make sure that that providing the recharging facilities stays ahead of the electric vehicle adoption rate. So it's always there available to them as they come, rather than having a sort of a stop and start because, people are afraid they're not going to be able to have the facilities to recharge. And then finally, on the fifth one, transportation demand management, I hope that includes the use of autonomous vehicles. The where there part of the problem with using smaller vehicles to do kind of demand, on demand transportation is you've got a lot more, a lot lower driver to passenger ratio because you've got a smaller vehicle to try to get around to different places, individual pickups and drop-offs. So you've got one driver and you might have 2 or 3 or 4 passengers rather than, a couple of dozen. Autonomous vehicles don't have that driver cost with them. So to the extent that as those autonomous vehicles come into play, I think that can be an important component of any kind of demand management system. That's all.
Commissioner Anderson, are you thinking you'd like to add a goal to this about supporting the use of autonomous vehicles?
I'm not sure it's a separate goal. I think in and around some of these things, I think both the development of autonomous vehicles and the adoption of electric vehicles are going to affect pretty much all of these strategies. And I just think that they all need to be kept in mind, with some in particular, but basically with all of these strategies.
Thank you. Any other commissioners? Commissioner Mills.
Thank you. I would say that as a general summary of this goal number 1 for transportation, it seems like we're using very delicate, soft language. There's no demand, there's no require, there's no expect. It's, some more support and promote and prioritize. And I feel like, it's great to say, hey, go out and ride your bike or go walk or go take a bus. But until we actually come out with some strong de-incentive to drive your car by yourself instead of doing these other things, then we're going to have a hard time trying to get people to change their behaviors just by asking them and saying please and maybe here's a nice thing. I also think that the prioritizing electric vehicles, it sounds great, but let's remind ourselves that the average Tesla, the starting cost is $40,000, go up to $120,000. This is not your everyday car for every person. This is for the richer folks among us who can afford this. So for everybody else, or for those who want to use other methods of transportation, this is we're throwing money at the already fairly wealthy, as opposed to trying to help those who probably need the most help. Biking, walking are free or near free, and are shown to be no energy use in those. So if we really want to go and try to eliminate a lot of our greenhouse gases, then as people were talking about, biking and walking downtown, making it friendly, but also making it friendly to get to schools and to the shopping markets and everything, so people can really have choices that are safe for everyone in the family to not have to drive a car. That would be, I think, a stronger strategy than simply saying we're going to promote it. We actually need to build the infrastructure to make that happen. So I would like to see goals that have more teeth to them, or maybe that have more metrics that we can use, so that we're going to say, hey, X number of people will be traveling by foot, by active transportation by this year. And then by this year, we have that goal. And then that gives our staff the ability to craft a plan that would achieve those goals, rather than simply saying we're going to promote active transportation. Again, what does that mean? And does it really have any effect if we're not really aiming for a certain specific goal? And then lastly, I know supporting telecommuting and remote work access, it sounds great, but it actually has been shown to not necessarily reduce greenhouse gases, because it allows people to move further away, in which case they still have to drive a further distance now to their office, they're just doing it less frequently, or they're further away, so they can afford a bigger house. So the bigger houses have higher greenhouse gases than they're using in their smaller house that they were living previously. So it's kind of a mixed bag. So I don't know that that necessarily will help us achieve a goal. It might just muddle the issue a little bit. But you know, the experts probably know more about that than I do. So those are my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner Ash.
Hey, thanks everyone. A few suggestions that I'd like to see in here. The first one is like small van transportation in the single family neighborhoods that takes you to like BART. So if there are companies out there that do this, and I think there are 2 autonomous and some that are still using drivers looking to go autonomous. But if you took a 15-seater van and brought it to Northgate High School or Bancroft Elementary School areas and took people within those residential neighborhoods where they could walk 5 minutes or less, they could easily take that to BART or to the downtown core. High school kids, middle school kids that can use it safely and track it. It could be a mix of user fees. So those monthly commuters can pay a monthly fee for it and the city can subsidize it. And there are for-profit companies that we can go out there and recruit to be in that space. So that is a big suggestion because that would help a lot with traffic on Treat and Ignacio, assuming we go back to a sort of similar commuter plan in 2 years from now, 3 years from now. The next suggestion I have, which I know is not directly in the city control on transportation, but the city can facilitate meetings with East Bay Parks related to lighting on the bike trails. If you did a survey, and I think some of this was in the micromobility survey that Ozzy had talked about, but he didn't specifically ask how many commuters, particularly during the 6 months where it gets darker out earlier, do not ride their bike to BART simply because it's not well lit and not safe. And I know there's environmental concerns, and I know that's outside of the city control, but the city could start working to facilitate that with East Bay Parks and make that a safer route, which will, I bet, would increase bike participation 5 to 10%. Again, that takes a lot of cars off of 2 main thoroughfares that are stuck in traffic, and that frees up emissions if you're not idling at traffic lights. And the next 2 parts that I had are, one, I wanted to know what the city fleet was doing. There is a large number of city-owned vehicles, trucks, cars, and police vehicles. What is the plan to convert them to all electric vehicles? That's my first question for staff. And my second question for staff is, how are we using big data sources for transportation planning? And who on staff can tackle those 2 last parts?
I can say on city fleet, our public works department is looking at ways to support more electric vehicles in our fleet. It is also an infrastructure problem of getting that charging infrastructure in at our corporation yard. So there are, that is something that we've talked about with them recently, of having a strategy to really move that forward at city facilities. The second question about, your second question was about big data on traffic, is that right?
Yeah.
Patterns. I would have to check with our traffic engineering staff and our transportation planning staff. I know that we do have a lot of data around parking and movement. And so I'm not an expert on that, but I can get back to you on it.
Thank you. So I'd like to recommend adding in here a goal and a timeline for converting 100% conversion of the city fleet, including police vehicles as appropriate.
Commissioner Ash, when you were talking about lighting on bike trails, were you thinking like the Iron Horse Trail as an example?
Yeah, the Iron Horse Trail, the Canal Trail. I know a lot of people that take the Ignacio Valley Canal Trail from the Pleasant Hill BART, and you could take that all the way down past Heather Farms, past the Bancroft Elementary School through almost near Valley Verde Elementary School at Lime Ridge.
Right. Great, thank you. Any other commissioners? Commissioner Salcido.
Thank you. So one of the things that I think is kind of, it's in here, but I think it could use some refinement in terms of how we describe it. And just to echo what Commissioner Anderson said about expanding the service areas and frequencies for public transit. I think that really needs to be done thoughtfully, and the demand needs to be there. And in order to create demand, it needs to be a desirable form of transportation, and that it needs to be seamless. If you're using multiple different agencies, and so there, I know we don't have a lot of control over all of these different transit authorities, but we do have seats on the advisory committees and things of that sort. And I think the more that we can do to make public transit, as well as other forms of active transportation and micromobility solutions, be appealing and a desirable and preferred way for people to get around, I think that will really help us with actually achieving a higher usage of public transit. But simply expanding it and increasing frequencies alone, I don't think is enough. I think it needs to be, we need to really think innovatively about transit and active transportation, and all of the infrastructure from door to door, on how that all works together to make it a mode of choice and change behavior. I also and I also think we do need to, we are a suburban community largely, and so the way that our neighborhoods operate is very different from Oakland or San Francisco. And so the same transit procedures that are used in urban areas won't always work. And I think Commissioner Ash kind of stated that with the idea of these smaller fleets of vehicles. And so I think really trying to attack it from not just our existing public transit agencies and how they operate, but just at a bigger level, how can we transform the way people in our city get around? And then just the entire infrastructure for active transportation, not just promoting it, but again, increasing the desirability of it and the ease of being able to take these alternative modes, like parking, ways to be able to repair a tire that's broken, things like that, are all part of making that more convenient and more acceptable to a lot of people. I also, and I don't know if this might come up in some other areas and some of the other goals, but it seems like there's an opportunity to reduce the amount of lawn and high maintenance landscapes within the city, including just looking at our plans for our city parks, where there is a lot of lawn and that requires mowing and a lot of water. And so how do we still maintain beautiful landscapes that people can use, but think about how that infrastructure works in a greener, more sustainable way that doesn't require so many lawnmowers, or the lawnmowers are electrically powered. And then one more thought in terms of transit is, considering how we could have dedicated lanes on certain major thoroughfares like YBR, dedicated transit lanes for BRT or other forms of transit to make it flow more quickly. And also just something that I see all the time is how wide our neighborhood streets are. And, you know, they were designed back at a time when, you know, the land use was built completely around the idea of the automobile. And that's so much asphalt and hard structure. And it would be amazing if we could replace some of that road with you know, boulevards and street trees and plantings that would make it much greener, pervious paving that would just create streets that actually serve green infrastructure for the city, rather than just being these basically highways with slower speeds. And we know that people in our community are frustrated with how fast people are driving down their streets. So if the streets are narrower, there could be some opportunities there to address a few different issues. And also coordinating with the school district on how we can reduce it. Every parent I know drops their child off at school, and most of them do it in a car. And so how do we reduce this lineup of vehicles every day, twice a day at our schools in the city? I think would be another agency we could partner with.
Thank you, Jamie. Sounds like a good suggestion going back to school buses. I'm sure Mr. Pickett remembers those too. Any other commissioners? Commissioner Reiser.
I took my hand down because it's been mentioned a couple times, but just to underscore the importance of countywide connectivity, I think that's what we're getting to. It was brought up at prior meetings as it relates to buses and transportation, not so much bringing it into the neighborhoods, but the ability to get from intercity within our county or within our region. I know that's easier said than done, but it's been mentioned. I just want to underscore the importance of that. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other commissioners? Commissioner Anderson? You are on mute, Mr. Anderson.
Double clicked it. I lived in Stockholm for a while, 30 years ago, and there with the sun in the wintertime goes down at about, it comes up at about 11 a.m. and it goes down, you know, during lunch. Most all of the paths, bicycle and pedestrian paths are lit, and they are busy from not from sun up to sundown, but well beyond, you know, hours into the dark part of the day, with commuters and bicycles and families out for walks. So it really can't help.
Thank you. Commissioner Cahill?
Yes, just side note, I guess in the future, I'd be curious to learn more about our traditionally underserved areas. Just going to throw that out there really quickly. And then the only thing that hasn't been mentioned, I don't think, is I was, you know, scanning down and looking at the building section, and there's a bulleted, something that specifically bullets facilitating partnerships to promote incentives for its electric appliances in that case. But just in thinking big picture, as we move out of the pandemic, we're going to be thinking a lot about economic development and how that's going to evolve moving forward. And I know the City of Walnut Creek has a lot of opportunities as far as that's concerned with our downtown, and, you know, spaces that can be filled with who knows what the future entails. But I think making a point to consider, especially in economic development, the value of public-private partnerships and different partnerships that we can also incorporate into making some of this happen. And I don't know if that's something that's just assumed and overlaid over all of this, because I probably will have similar comments for the other categories, but you know, things like, I mean, we talked about the Toyota project on Tuesday, things like, you know, partnering to have car share programs in new developments, or even, you know, micromobility in those new developments, or partnering maybe with a lot of large companies, for instance, have, you know, like transit voucher programs or parking programs. Well, they'll pay for parking for their employees if, you know, they drive into the city or wherever they drive for work. So maybe, you know, partnering with large companies in the region to have some sort of, you know, voucher program for working within your own city as well. So, you know, maybe you're not telecommuting from home, maybe you still want to work in a workspace surrounded by other professionals and creative people. And I know that we have some of those spaces that are opening up in Walnut Creek that are shared office space. I'm hoping they are surviving all of this right now. But, you know, maybe looking at ways that we can partner to encourage use of that and also promote economic development and use of our downtown. So just wanted to throw out that. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner German.
Yeah, as I first looked at the list, I went, wow, there's a lot of strategies on that list. And then as the second piece is the first 3 or 4 strategies cost people money. On the other hand, the last 3 strategies are the kind of things that staff is able to do now. You wouldn't need extra staff to do. And the idea is that the things above would go out of ride sharing and telecommuting. And especially over the last year, we've seen people telecommute more than in the past. I don't think we're going to have office space used the way we've seen it used in the past. So I would go with less strategies overall, and perhaps have subcategories go along with them. That's all.
Thank you. Tammy, are you ready to move on to your next slide?
I am. Thank you, Chair. All right. So thanks, everyone. We were all scribbling furiously. So if you saw us looking down, it was just to make sure we were keeping our pens on the paper. So now we're on the buildings category, and we have 2 goals here. So let's go to the first goal, which is to reduce energy-related greenhouse gas emissions. We have 5 strategy ideas here. The first one is related to new development and major renovations, and this would be related a REACH code, perhaps, as was mentioned earlier. So require new development and major renovations to exceed California Building Code minimum requirements, including energy efficiency standards. Number 2 is to explore establishment of a fund to cover costs for energy efficiency, electrification, renewable energy projects. That would be funded by savings from existing or past projects to educate and inform the community about how to continue to be efficient and transition to electric appliances. Programs to continue to replace outdated electronic appliances and office equipment in city facilities. And 5, to facilitate partnerships to promote incentives for electric appliances. So similar to before, we're open to your thoughts on these 5 strategies. Are there opportunities? Did we miss anything? Are there special important considerations for implementation?
Thank you, Tammy. Any commissioners wish to chime in? Commissioner Reiser.
I'm actually going to take a step back really quickly. Something I forgot to bring up or hasn't been brought up yet. We all received an email from this afternoon on the smart street lighting that a resident had sent to our inboxes. And I just wanted to it probably goes in under transportation, but make sure that's included in there somewhere. I thought it was very interesting. It said that smart street lighting accounts for 25% of a city's budget and a savings of 66%. I'm sure that translates all the way through with energy savings, et cetera. So just wanted to point that out before we move on. I was going to bring it up under buildings. I have it in my notes here to bring it up now, but I guess it makes more sense under transportation since it affects streets.
Thank you. Commissioner Pickett?
Yeah, I just wanted to probably point out the obvious, but strategy number one, you know, out of one side of our mouth, we're talking about the housing crisis, and on the other side of our mouth, we're talking about making construction cost more. I think everybody recognizes that, but you got to be really careful about using that as a strategy to accomplish anything, because it's gonna step on somebody's toes. The other thing, the conversion to electric. And I know the last time we had this discussion, Commissioner Anderson had some insight into electric production, but you know that, of course, environmentalists, you know, oppose hydroelectric power, which is, you know, very clean. Many of our windmill farms, or whatever you want to call them, are opposed by environmental factions that worry about birds getting, you know, hit by a windmill. So there are going to be limitations. You go do these things in the desert, then you got, you know, infrastructure you got to build to get it to places. There's going to be you know, significant limitations on our ability to replace all power with electric appliances. The other thing is heating and cooling, or cooling is typically electrical. Heating is more expensive to operate with electrical appliances than with gas-fired appliances. So there's some hidden little things there that we need to be careful about if we're trying to promote electrical usage, and mainly keeping up with it, and the financial impact on the public who has to pay for the extra cost of converting to electric.
Thank you. Commissioner Anderson?
Yeah, thanks. With respect to the same goal, the first goal there, you know, it talks about new development and major renovations. About 30 years ago, I was interviewed for a article on the buildings of the future, looking ahead 30 years. And my first comment was that, you know, more than half the buildings that are going to be here 30 years from now are already here. And I think that's still true today. If we're looking at a horizon of 2050, half the buildings are already here. So I'm all for new development and major renovations having, you know, a lot of energy efficiency standards, you know, exceeding the state standards. That's great. That was the work I did for 15 years. But you're not going to get the deep cuts that are anticipated without dealing with the existing buildings. That's a more difficult problem because you've got lots of different types of situations that you need to rectify. A lot of the low-hanging fruit of, you know, weather stripping and changing out lightings and so forth has been done, but there needs to be a strategy to include the retrofitting existing buildings if we're going to get to where we want to get to. At the same time, I think you have to, you know, understand that, you know, with those existing buildings, there's only so much you can do before you get to really prohibitive costs.
Commissioner German? David, you're on mute.
I had my hand up by mistake.
Oh, thank you. Any other commissioners? Commissioner Lezak?
Yeah, I think I'd like to support a lot of the things that Commissioner Anderson said. I know in my questions earlier, I brought up the question of the REACH code. I actually am not really personally that in favor of the REACH code at this point. not because I don't think that energy efficiency is significantly an important part of buildings, or that I'm not hugely in favor of all electric. But I think that what we're saying is the energy code and the current state requirements are already fairly significant, and at least for new residential housing, are essentially going to become net zero within the next code cycle or two. So the additional benefit of trying to reach beyond what the current state code is not a huge benefit, and I think is potentially a problem for some development opportunities. Right now, we've prioritized in our city most of our residential and commercial development in the downtown areas in what are the most expensive types of buildings to build. And we've restricted the height in such a way that they can be efficiently built. And so, we've created a housing element that's based on housing that's almost, impossible to economically build. And it's a challenge that I think that we need to not necessarily, through our ambitions, restrict the realities of the market. And I feel that way also about the natural gas. It's not that I'm in favor of natural gas, and it's not that I have an interest in putting natural gas in the street or in new buildings, but I do think that there are certain applications where certain types of restaurants and other commercial uses really do want to have natural gas, and I don't want to affect the ability of our commercial downtown to develop the way we would like by placing a reach goal that has the unintended consequence of changing our uses in a way that's not what we're looking for. So I'm totally in favor of all electric appliances. I'm in favor of energy efficient buildings. I'm extremely in favor of requiring as community benefit additional car charging and electric vehicle car charging stations on public property, and having some benefit to adding them to private property, but I'm not in favor of the REACH code ordinances. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Salcido.
A few thoughts, primarily related to materials with buildings. So, with new construction and renovations and things like that, there can be a lot of waste in that process. And so that's something that I don't think is really in here at the moment in terms of encouraging, creative reuse of materials and sourcing materials locally when you do need to use native materials to reduce the carbon impact. And then thinking about just the surface area of our buildings and the surrounding areas, the parking lots, the parking structures, and how, those roofs can be more productive in terms of adding green space, adding solar panels, so that, as much of our footprint, our physical footprint as possible, is beneficial to our sustainability goals.
Thank you, Commissioner Ash.
I was just gonna add, if we could do any more for community solar projects, similar to the one in the Heather Farms parking lot, where we can identify city places and make it possibly profitable for the city to add more community solar. We should be looking at that to offset, the commercial buildings and the multifamily buildings. Could be an easy, inexpensive way to, create additional sources.
Thank you. Any other commissioners? Tammy, my only comment would be if we could do anything to promote low efficiency or high efficiency, low greenhouse gas emissions as part of any building or home remodel or upgrade, that would be great. I know when we did our remodel, we have all LED lights We put in new heater, air conditioner, and because of all the efficiencies, we actually were able to downsize that equipment. And it's even more efficient than what it was before. So anything we could do to help or promote to homeowners, businesses, building owners, I think that would be great. And with that, why don't we move on to your next goal?
Great, thank you. Well, be sure to tell all your friends about your renovation and efficiency improvements. That's step one.
We give tours.
Oh, great. I do the same. Okay, still in buildings and energy, our second goal is to transition to carbon-free energy sources. We have 3 strategy ideas here. First one is related to low carbon concrete code standards to reduce embodied emissions. The second is to incentivize or require new construction, major retrofits, or appliance replacements to transition from natural gas to electricity, which we have talked about a little bit already, and work with contractor groups to ensure widespread awareness of energy efficiency in all electric appliances and available financial incentives. And I believe it's just those 3 for goal 2.
Thank you. Any input on these goals or on this goal? Sounds pretty good. Either you hit it perfectly or we're getting tired. So you want to move on to your next. Oh,
see one hand.
Ward. Commissioner Ward.
Yeah, sorry. Thank you. And I definitely am getting a little tired, but, but not because of any of this. So I just looking at the way this is written and the lists that are given here, and I think this has been touched on before, but it just looks like, switching to all electric appliances is the key to our entire success with regard to buildings in this plan. And I don't think that's the case. And I think we need to think a lot bigger and a lot broader in terms of what's being listed here, because just if nothing else, the continually repeating, all electric appliances makes it seem like that, if I would only get a different stove, then, our city could meet our goals. And I don't think that's our intention here. And I think that we need to be, just have more robust category descriptions so that people really understand what we're really working towards here. And I think the ideas of encouraging solar and more, planting on rooftops and all these kind of things they work into this, and windows and different kinds of building materials and the like. It's not just appliances. So that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other commissioners that I might have missed? Commissioner Mills.
Thank you. I'll just piggyback on that comment of in either of these goals, I didn't really notice anything specifically about insulation, for example. And that's a huge aspect of what we're dealing with energy loss. And I know for a fact our house has no insulation in the walls, and it's 60 years old, and it's very typical of all the houses built in the time period, which is a lot of them in Walnut Creek and the Bay Area in general. So again, yeah, as Commissioner Ward said, moving to all electric sounds great, but it doesn't really solve the problem of how do we reduce the energy used all the way around, not just in these few key appliances. So
thank you. And I agree, looking at any new building material that has lower greenhouse gas emissions as part of the production would be great. Any other commissioners? Okay, seeing none, Tammy, I think we can move on.
Great, thank you. So I am aware of the time here, and we do have 3 more slides. So I can also check in with the commissioners on your preference here. So in your attachment 3, we do have these same strategies on the slides here for community health and resilience. And there are 3 goals, and we put them on 3 slides for you. And I can follow the same approach to go through each one. Or if you'd all like the opportunity to address all 3 goals, I mean, I can defer to all of you in the interest of time. So, but I'll go ahead and read goal 1. But if you all feel like you'd like to share on all of the health and resilience strategies, we'll be flexible. So the first goal is to promote sustainability practices throughout the community. And this is, there's a set of strategies here that are really about engagement and just kind of getting folks involved. So developing opportunities for youth education and engagement, creative educational experiences throughout the community related to sustainability, with an example of eco art, partnerships and collaborations with neighboring jurisdictions and regional agencies to support information sharing on a number of sustainability related topics, and to recognize the connection between economic growth and development and sustainability. So specifically to encourage economic growth in sectors that reduce dependency on fossil fuels and actively promote good paying jobs and clean and carbon free industries, encourage and also encourage the location and growth of these industries in Walnut Creek. So we can pause here for goal 1.
I think that's great, Tammy. Any comments from commissioners? All right, Tammy, seeing none, we'll move on to the next goal.
Great. That means we're all in on sustainability education. So goal 2, Eli.
I had some comments and questions.
Oh,
sorry.
Commissioner Pickett?
Just a couple of questions on example strategy number 4. It talks about enforcement of people idling engines. What is the vision of enforcement of somebody sitting in a line somewhere with an idling engine? What does that mean in real life?
Oh, so Eli, I think we can advance to the next slide. This is the idling policy for air quality.
Yeah, I'm looking at goal 1. Improve air quality.
Goal 1 on our package.
Oh, we flipped them on you by accident. Yeah. I apologize. See, you all, you're not too tired. So, Kara, do you want to elaborate on the idling enforcement if that's happening in the city?
Yeah, we don't have enforcement currently. Our approach is more educational with the community for drivers who are idling. So for example, at schools, we've offered signage about, encouraging drivers to not idle while picking up their kids. We have a city policy now for the city fleet to not idle. So in that sense, we would kind of enforce with our employees and educate them not to idle city vehicles. But this goal would look at expanding that. I don't think we would really envision like using the police to enforce this. It's more about maybe very strong education.
I think you ought to strike that. It's too draconian. It just, I'm seeing guys with armbands with little symbols on them. I just don't think you can do that. Whether a guy's standing in line to get pump gas or standing in line to get his electric vehicle charged, it's of course they wouldn't be idling. But anyhow, that is, I think, is a little bit over the top on language. So I'm sorry I got out of order there. I was looking at my list of goal 1, 2, and 3.
It's fine. That's on us. So I apologize for flipping up the slides.
So which one are we supposed to be on before I got out of order?
So if you on your handout, it would be goal 2, the promote sustainability practices throughout the community. That was the one that was just up.
Okay. So I have some questions on that too, as long as I got the mic. It's just terminology I'm not familiar with. Example strategy number 2, explore creating opportunities for eco art educational experiences. What is that?
So just broadly, that strategy is about kind of looking at educational experiences. We had a number of community members and environmental groups submit a climate emergency resolution where they had the idea of having art that is educational and has maybe climate or green themes in the art to help educate the public. So they were calling that eco art. So that's just one way you could educate the community in a kind of creative way.
Okay, I get it. So the eco art is a medium to communicate environmental behavior, friendly behavior. Okay.
Yes.
And then on the last one on there, actively promote good paying jobs in clean and carbon free industries. How is that? What does that mean?
So this is something where we could, work closely with our economic development staff and think about ways to, for example, look at clean tech companies. There are the whole transition with our auto dealerships if they're selling more EVs. There's different jobs that might spring up as we make this transition to more carbon-free society. And so are there jobs that we want to attract to Walnut Creek or maybe encourage? And it could be, like I said, clean tech, which is like high paying, good jobs. And it could also just be maybe entry level jobs for teenagers around, helping with waste reduction or prevention, teaching people to reuse things. So I think there are a lot of different things we could look at. And as we kind of develop different actions to implement that, we can become more specific.
So is that something we would discuss in further detail in the implementation aspect of this program?
Yeah, as we move into phase 3 and we are drafting a plan, we'll have not only the goals and the strategies, but some specific implementation actions. But if you have specific ideas now, you can definitely suggest them.
I don't. I didn't even really understand what it meant. But it's the kind of thing we can discuss when we get to implementation. Thank you.
Great. Why don't we go to goal 2 now, Tammy, and see if there's any other questions on goal 2?
Yeah, thank you. So that our goal 2 on the slide, it's also goal 1 in your packet. This is the air quality goal. And I think we've started to go over this a little bit. So this includes strategies related to participation in the air district's community air risk evaluation programs and spare the air programs, continuing related to education and awareness. There's a strategy for a community-wide ban on gas-powered leaf blowers for homes and businesses, a strategy related to tree planting and green infrastructure to increase community resilience and support carbon sequestration, with a focus on public spaces and areas in the city in need and drought tolerant, locally appropriate trees. The idling policy that we've talked about a little bit already, and opportunities to require tree planting for new parking lots and large development projects.
Thank you. Any comments on this goal? Commissioner Ward.
Thank you. I wanted to comment mostly on something that seems to be missing from this. And we talk a lot about equity and inclusion in our city, something where we historically have not done very well with. And obviously there's a huge social justice component to clean air. There's a higher incidence of asthma and other health conditions in certain populations that are underserved typically. And clean air and water has unfortunately become a kind of access and equity issue for a lot of communities, including ours. And I don't see any element of that included in this. And if we're going to talk about community health overall, I think we have to look at how clean air and water and access to various environmental and reduced greenhouse gas and all these different things are how we're promoting equity and inclusion in our community with regard to that. So I think it needs to be in there somewhere. I'm not sure if it goes in improved air quality or education or where it goes, but it's missing and it needs to be in there. So thank you.
Any other commissioners? Commissioner Salcido.
One thing I'm not sure if it would be appropriate to include in this section would perhaps be addressing indoor air quality in addition to just overall air quality in the community, given we are experiencing increased threats of wildfires that force us to a certain degree to stay indoors for parts of the year. And I think to Commissioner Ward's point about equity, you know, a lot of these communities will have fewer options in terms of you know, where they can shelter during various things like a pandemic and other natural disasters that make indoor air quality also important from a community health perspective.
Thank you. Any other commissioners? Tammy, my only comment would be the gas-powered leaf blowers, you know, that came about or started because of the noise they make. I think it's good to transition to the electric blowers. Electric may not be the best in all situations, but maybe we should consider adding lawnmowers to that where appropriate. And why don't we move on to the third goal?
Great, thank you. Thanks, everyone. This is our last goal for this evening. Goal 3 is to increase resilience to changing climate conditions. So we were just talking about this. So consider, so this is a first policy is to consider the potential benefits and consequences of new policies and programs for historically marginalized or under-resourced populations. And avoid policies or programs that exacerbate or perpetuate economic, social, and environmental inequities. So this is more of a policy approach going forward. Second strategy is to educate about potential disaster events that could harm the community and how to be prepared. So continuing much of what's been done. Similarly, number 3 is about community education and active drills. Focused on the vulnerable populations and areas with limited vehicle access as identified in the vulnerability assessment. 4 is to support installation of battery backup systems with solar panels, and 5 is to conduct regular fuel clearing and maintenance of defensible space in coordination with public and private landowners. And that's it.
Thank you. Any comments from commissioners on goal 3? Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you. 2 comments on the second strategy. When you're talking about potential disaster events, are you speaking only about, you know, the sudden and brief events such as a fire, or are you dealing also with kind of the more long-term chronic things like, you know, the effect on crops, just not being able to raise the same crops that you've been raising for the last 100 years? I'm just kind of curious whether you're including both of those.
You know, I think when we drafted that, we were thinking about the different disasters and hazards that were highlighted in the vulnerability assessment. So things like droughts, urban heat, island effect, extreme heat, wildfires. So some of those might be more set in and some of those might be more long-term.
The second question I had, or comment, is on the battery backup systems. It's not only that they're helpful for backup, but they can do a tremendous amount of peak smoothing, so that if they're coordinated properly and, you know, used at the right time, they can help the utility considerably to reduce basically the number of plants that they need to produce the electricity. So that's an additional advantage of the battery backup that probably ought to be mentioned.
Thank you. Any other commissioners? Commissioner Pickett?
Just to follow up on Commissioner Anderson's comments, does anybody in this group know what it costs to put in a battery backup system in a typical residential home, 2,000 to 2,500 square feet, which is probably about average for Walnut Creek? Does anybody know the cost of doing that?
I will say that some prices I've seen have ranged between 8,000 to 10,000, including permitting. And I will say that I think prices right now are fairly high, and as technology develops, there's the hope and expectation that they will drop over time.
That's the battery wall, but not the solar panels.
So that's just the battery alone. So this strategy says support installation. Is that suggesting that the city would support payment of that $8,000 to $10,000?
This could be looking at different ways to support more installations, such as financial incentives or rebates, or perhaps there's a need to streamline our permitting or other things we could do to help just increase more installations.
Does anybody have any crystal ball on the improvements in efficiency and the potential of prices coming down on those things? I know that there's a lot of work, particularly related to electric vehicles, giving them greater range. Our friend Elon Musk is working diligently to do that stuff, but does anybody have any knowledge of where that technology stands and what the forecast is for potential affordability of those things?
I know, Bob, that they have dropped quite a bit over the last 2 years in price, and they're probably not going to drop as drastically as they have, but I think they're going to continue to go down.
Thanks.
If I could just add to that, the Lawrence Berkeley Lab has been for 40 years working on battery improvements, advanced batteries, and with steady but incremental progress for a long, long time. The last 5 years, there has been, it's really kind of crossed a threshold to batteries that really, the capacity and the efficiency has really improved dramatically. And I don't know whether that will continue, but it may.
I just want to throw out another comment that the thing we're going to have to deal with in 20 years is what do we do with all those batteries? We're going to have a disposal problem, just like we did with the nuclear rods out of the nuclear power generating plants. We're going to have a bunch of batteries we got to get rid of. So I think that one's really, really low on the totem pole as far as being effective for anybody.
Any other comments? Commissioner Saucedo.
This might be out of the scope of the City of Walnut Creek, but I don't know if there could be anything about burying power lines so that there is reduced fire risk, given a lot of the wildfires we've seen were sparked by PG&E transmission lines. And then I am also wondering about, the risk of increased drought and whether we should, in terms of our resilience, what we should be looking into in terms of water harvesting and storage of water resources for when we become more desperate for that. And I think the city has already done some great work in that respect with the purple lines and water reuse in our parks and things like that. And I'd love to see those types of projects continue. That's it.
Thank you. Commissioner Milks?
Yeah, I'd like to follow up on that and second that we should have, I think, some kind of goal would be appropriate to saving, reusing water, rainwater, gray water. It's right there in our house already or falling on our house, and we can use that before we start to turn into the tap for watering our gardens and things like that. So I think I'd second that motion.
Thank you. Any other commissioners? Okay, one last shot for any of the commissioners for any last minute comments. Going once. So, all right. Thank you, Tammy, Eli. Kara, did you get everything you need from us, or do you have any closing remarks you want to make?
No, just thank you all so much for your comments and thoughts and for the long evening.
Great. Well, thanks to the three of you. Done a great job, and I think it went pretty smooth considering everything we covered. And with that, we will, Ethan, I think we can just, since it's a special meeting, we can just adjourn for the evening, correct?
That is correct, Chair Kersalik.
Great. We will then stand adjourned. Thank you, everybody.